Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Alex Bell, host of To the Point on ABC 10. And over the next 30 minutes, we're looking at the latest major changes in the Trump transition and also addressing what it could mean for California in the weeks and months ahead. I'll also be speaking with two guests about the incoming administration and how proposed immigration policies could impact California. But first, let's go ahead and jump right into the president-elect, his cabinet picks that have been announced so far this week. Here's a look at several of the secretary positions, including Marco Rubio for Secretary of State. We have Pete Hegseth as Defense Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as Health and Human Services Secretary, and Pam Bondi as Attorney General. All of these positions will need Senate confirmation, and other positions that also need Senate confirmation include Linda McMahon as Education Secretary. We have Sean Duffy as Transportation Secretary, Doug Collins as Veteran Affairs Secretary, and then Kristi Noem as Homeland Security Secretary. Other notable Trump administration picks include Mike Waltz as National Security Advisor, Tom Homan as Border Czar, Dr. Mehmet Oz as Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and then we have Dr. Jeanette Neshwat as Surgeon General, and Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy to head the Department of Government Efficiency. As Trump's cabinet and administration starts to take shape, several of his picks are spending time on Capitol Hill trying to gain senator support. On Monday, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. making his case to lawmakers. If confirmed, Kennedy would oversee health agencies, including the Food and Drug Administration and Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, having broad influence over public health in the U.S. Now, Kennedy faces skepticism from lawmakers in both parties after spreading false theories about vaccines, claiming they are not safe and effective, even though most used today have been used safely for decades. President-elect Trump was asked this week if he wants Kennedy to revoke any vaccines.
No, I want him to come back with a report as to what he thinks. No, nothing's going to happen very quickly.
Senator Mitch McConnell, a polio survivor himself, releasing a warning saying, quote, efforts to undermine public confidence in proven cures are not just uninformed, they are dangerous, adding anyone seeking the Senate's consent to serve in the incoming administration would do well to steer clear of even the appearance of association with such efforts. A spokesman for Kennedy says that he believes the polio vaccine should be available to the public and thoroughly and properly studied. Trump also saying this week that the polio vaccine will not be affected.
You're not going to lose the polio vaccine. That's not going to happen. I saw what happened with the polio. I have friends that were very much affected by that.
Kennedy could win over support from some Democrats when it comes to issues like processed foods. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, for one, says it's premature to say how he will vote on Kennedy's confirmation. In California, state leaders are taking action to strengthen progressive policies ahead of a second Trump administration, including protecting immigrant communities. California is home to more than 10.4 million immigrants, according to the Public Policy Institute of California. Their research shows in 2022, 27% of California's population was foreign-born, and almost half of California children have at least one immigrant parent. During the first Trump administration, California lawmakers passed SB 54, known as the Sanctuary State Law, and it limits the involvement of local law enforcement in deportations. Since winning re-election, Trump has continued to say he intends to declare a national emergency and use the military in some form to assist in deporting the millions of undocumented people he says that are living in the United States. Brandon Lewis from our National Verify team looks into what this means for U.S. citizens whose parents or spouses are undocumented.
On the campaign trail, President-elect Donald Trump repeatedly pledged to deport the millions of people who are in the U.S. illegally. During an interview with NBC's Meet the Press, Trump said he would consider deporting entire families, possibly including children with U.S. citizenship, whose parents are undocumented.
I don't want to be breaking up families, so the only way you don't break up the family is you keep them together and you have to send them all back.
Multiple posts on social media responded to Trump's interview by claiming it's unconstitutional to deport U.S. citizens. But is that true? Let's verify. Our sources are the Constitution, the Supreme Court, and these legal experts. Trump's transition team didn't respond to our questions asking to clarify his plan, but it's likely most of the children Trump was talking about received birthright citizenship under the 14th Amendment. Unless the children renounce their citizenship, the Supreme Court ruled in 1967 the government cannot involuntarily strip a citizen of their citizenship. Every legal expert we spoke with says that means U.S.-born children or citizens who have an undocumented spouse can't be deported. So, yes, it is unconstitutional to deport U.S. citizens. However, the undocumented parents being deported could take their U.S. children with them. The kids would keep their U.S. citizenship and would be free to return on their own whenever they like. With your Verify, I'm Brandon Lewis.
In response to Trump's deportation threats, California Attorney General Rob Bonta issued 2 guidances this week. One focuses on understanding immigrant rights and protections under the law. The other gives insight into how to protect yourself from immigration scams. So here's what Bonta says that you should look out for.
Don't give your original documents to anyone unless you see proof that the government needs them. And make sure to keep your original documents in a safe place. Don't hire an immigration consultant or notary. Only lawyers, only accredited representatives and recognized organizations can give you legal advice or represent you in court. Do not give money or personal information to anyone who calls or texts or emails you claiming that there is a problem with your immigration matter. No federal or state agency will ever ask for personal information or payment by phone, email, or text.
Bonta says it's also important to know your rights. State and local law enforcement cannot ask for your immigration status. They also cannot interrogate, arrest, or detain you unless it's part of a joint force where the primary purpose is not immigration enforcement. And if you are arrested, you have the right to an attorney. Now, to help us answer questions about the Trump transition and the possible impacts to the immigrant community, we want to go ahead and bring in 2 of our guests. We have former UC Davis School of Law Dean Kevin Johnson, and then also UC Davis law lecturer Amagda Pérez, who is joining us now. We appreciate you guys being here very, very much. We know that there's a lot to unpack. The first being that, immigration issues are not new to the United States. So, Kevin, I want to ask you first, can you briefly just walk us through how immigration has really changed in the United States when it comes to first starting with the Obama administration, then the Trump, his first term, then Biden? Can you walk us through a little bit of that?
Well, President Obama is thought of as being very moderate on immigration. And he did promulgate the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program that benefited hundreds of thousands of young undocumented people who came to this country. But at the same time, President Obama worked diligently to remove large numbers of persons who had contact with the criminal justice system and deported 300,000 to 400,000 people a year during his time in office. He was known in some circles as a deporter-in-chief. Now, President Trump, in his first administration, took a similar but much more aggressive approach to immigration enforcement, and he combined it with very harsh language for undocumented immigrants in a way that President Obama would never speak of immigrants. But President Trump, in his first days in office, put into place what is known as the Muslim ban that barred people, non-citizens from predominantly Muslim nations, from coming to this country. And it threw things into uproar because the plan wasn't well thought through. It wasn't clear who was protected, who wasn't. And large numbers of students, professors, and attorneys went to airports across the country to assist non-citizens from Muslim nations from entering the country. And I think that the Muslim ban sort of typifies the kind of approach that President Trump in his first term took to immigration. Very tough, very aggressive, not always as thoroughly thought out as they could be measures taken to enforce the immigration laws. And one example I'll give you that directly impacted California, that some people have already forgotten, is that President Trump and his immigration custom enforcement conducted enforcement operations at courthouses, state courthouses throughout the state. And for immigrants who were taking care traffic tickets or being witnesses at trials or just taking care of their judicial business. Maybe it's getting married, maybe it's getting divorced. They were sort of swept up in this immigration wave. And at the time, the Chief Justice of California, Tani Cantil-Safiue, sent a letter to the Attorney General and the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security saying, you're frightening people away from the state courthouses in California. We can't do our judicial business. Please refrain from doing those kinds of raids. And not much happened. So I do fear that sort of enforcement like that could be coming down the pike in a new Trump administration.
And what did we see under Biden?
Well, President Biden took a more moderate approach. And one very important part of the approach, I think, was that he didn't speak in terms that denigrated immigrants or characterized them as criminals or blamed them for the cost of housing or for attacking pets or anything like that. President Biden tried. Sometimes people might be critical of how harshly he enforced the immigration laws, but some people said he didn't enforce the immigration laws enough. I do think that it's important to remember that migrant flows across the U.S.-Mexico border have occurred for generations under Republican presidents and Democratic presidents, and that what we've seen over the last few years isn't that different than what we've seen from the years of President Reagan in the 1980s all the way through to the present. But President Biden often has been charged with not being aggressive enough in immigration enforcement. And one claim that's made that I don't really understand is the claim that President Biden has endorsed an open borders policy. One thing I can say for sure, being an immigration law professor, is that we have a very complex set of immigration laws, and it's not an open borders policy in the least.
Now, what we've been talking about is President-elect Donald Trump has come out very publicly saying that once he's in office, he is supporting mass deportations. I want to ask you both, based on what Trump has said so far, can you give us some insight at who may be impacted first when it comes to these potential deportations?
So I think, definitely the message out there is, as Dean Johnson had mentioned, is those who have been tied to the legal system, right, who have had criminal convictions. But there's also, a concern that people who have temporary protected status might also become vulnerable. And I think, as he mentioned during his campaign, that anyone who comes in contact with law enforcement or with immigration customs is vulnerable regardless of how much time they've been in the United States and whether or not they have criminal conduct in their backgrounds.
And you both have worked extensively with the immigrant community. What are some of the fears that people are talking about? What are you guys hearing right now?
So I think the biggest is family separation, right? Parents are really concerned about being separated from their children. You have U.S. citizen children that are really worried about, going to school and coming home and not finding their parents. You have, college-age students who are thinking, twice about going to college or applying for federal financial aid for benefits that they are eligible for because they don't want to bring any attention to their parents and be separated.
Kevin, are you hearing the same things as well?
I think that Professor Pérez puts it quite well, is that there's a great deal of fear about some very basic things. We have immigrants who are afraid of going to church, taking their children to school, going to court and taking care of their judicial business. And it's not just because they're worried about being apprehended. It's worried about being separated from their family and losing their entire life in the United States. These may be people who have been here for 5, 10, 15, 20 years who may be parts of our community and are members of our community, but are afraid to do some very basic things and live in fear that their life can be turned on its head by an encounter with Immigration Customs Enforcement authorities, by going to a 7-Eleven store, for example, which is one place where the first Trump administration conducted raids. And I think that it's hard to characterize just how deep that fear goes, but we see Know Your Rights sessions throughout Northern California, but I think throughout the state. The fears are great. Panic is in place in some quarters, and it makes me sad to think that some people are so scared they have to change their entire way of living.
I'm curious to know that as we're talking about the threat of mass deportation, what does that process actually look like if it were to happen? In your experience, are people notified beforehand? Do they get a chance to appear in court and appeal a case? What would the process end up looking like?
Right. So typically if a person is apprehended, they get a notice to appear and they get put in removal proceedings. So they would have an opportunity to have a hearing before an immigration judge and go through that process. However, there are individuals who might not be eligible to have a hearing before an immigration judge, and these might be individuals who have outstanding removal orders already and have not left the country. Some of them are here just because they didn't even get notice of their hearing, right? They might have moved, didn't get hearing, and don't even know that they have a removal order against them. So these families are all vulnerable, but typically they would. Now, there are, under the Trump administration, there is concern that there would just be expedited removal, that people would just be apprehended and deported without due process. Which
I think that's what some people are really anticipating. Yeah.
Which is really, against our judicial process, right, and what the constitutional rights of community members. But it is something that, we know that, the fear, sometimes people will just not want to be detained, so they might sign a voluntary return and just give up that opportunity to fight their case and possibly be able to remain in the United States.
I do want to talk to you about family separation because I know that you mentioned it. What do you anticipate family separation looking like under a second Trump administration?
Right. So we know that there's already, a lot of attention at the border again, right? So families being, separated, even through this whole process, sometimes, children get separated from their parents, but at least under the current administration, they were attempted to be kept together and given that opportunity to apply for relief. I think the concern under the new administration is again, the people coming across the border are going to be denied that opportunity to have their hearings. They're going to be sent back. Children might be, detained separately from their parents. So these are the greatest concerns. And within the United States, again, whether or not the parents are apprehended at their work site or after dropping off their children, right, that children are going to come home and not find their parents. So it's going to be just an immediate separation, and I think that that's what has both parents and children very concerned.
Well, I'm happy that you brought that up because I did want to talk to you about that. Are there resources for those children who that may possibly happen to?
Right. So there's definitely a network of organizations that are doing the Know Your Rights presentations. We're out in the community doing family preparedness, so it's helping parents have legal documents so that some trusted caregiver can take care of their children. I think, for a lot of parents, they're really concerned about their children being put in the foster care system if there isn't someone, that they can trust, because we know of the dangers and sometimes of the abuses that happen to children within that system. So parents are legitimately afraid of that happening. So there is, a network of rapid response attorneys that will be available to assist parents who might get detained, but also resources for those children, whether it's through the schools or through community-based organizations, to guide those families on the resources that they would be eligible for.
Kevin, I want to ask you, and I know that we've talked about this before, there's also some concern about documented individuals, citizens, also being swept up in all of this. Can you give a little bit more context about that?
Well, I think it's important to remember that many families, maybe as many as 20% of the families in the United States, are families with mixed status. That is, some U.S. citizen family members, maybe children, and immigrant parents. And I think that the concern is, and this concern is a real one, is that U.S. citizen children may end up being removed with their parents from the country, or in effect removed if their parents are removed. And in fact, the border czar designate Tom Homan said that, well, one alternative to family separation is family deportation, removing entire families, not just splitting families apart. So I do think that there's a concern that U.S. citizens may be caught up in this mass deportation campaign. And sadly enough, this has happened in United States history. During the Great Depression, close to 1 million Mexican immigrants and persons of Mexican ancestry were removed from the United States by state and local governments with federal support. About a third or more were U.S. citizens, U.S. citizen children of immigrant parents. During operation known as Operation Wetback in 1954, where about 1 million persons of Mexican ancestry were removed, about a third of those were U.S. citizen children. So the concern is really that citizens will be caught up in this sort of deportation fervor, end up getting removed from the country. And besides that, one of the things that is worried about is that racial profiling and immigration enforcement will result in the questioning of U.S. citizens who look to fit the profile of being undocumented from Mexico, Central America, or other nations south of here. So I think that the specter of increased immigration enforcement raises civil rights concerns of many U.S. citizens of Mexican ancestry.
I want to talk about local law enforcement, because when we're talking about mass deportation, I think a lot of people have the question of what does local law enforcement's role look like in all of this? Are they required to cooperate with immigration and customs enforcement?
And in California, definitely not. There is not
definitely not.
There's not that requirement unless there are security risks, right? So, but absent that, and I think that there has been a commitment from law enforcement, from the governor's office, right? That law enforcement,
as we just mentioned,
exactly, that they will not be cooperating. They will not be doing the job of federal immigration officers.
I want to talk about economic impacts as well. How could mass deportations possibly impact California's economy?
I think that California has about 40% of the nation's undocumented immigrant population of about 11 million people. Many of those undocumented immigrants are workers who contribute to agriculture, to the service industry, construction, restaurant industry as well. And what we could see if there are mass deportations is a labor shortage, which we're already seeing in many of those industries as well. Farmers have been registering concern with labor shortages for quite some time. And we could see impacts on finding labor, the price of labor, and the price of goods. One of the benefits, and it's not always something to write home about, but one of the benefits of immigrant labor is our produce prices are relatively low compared to much of the world. And we currently perhaps pay $2 for a head of lettuce. With labor shortages, we could be paying a lot more for a head of lettuce. And I think that it's not just economics we're worried about, but I do think there are economic impacts of this deportation campaign that have to be paid some attention to.
And I do want to talk about those individuals who fall under DACA status. If you're not familiar with DACA status, that's the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. You might know them as Dreamers as well. In this program, it really provides protection for people who arrive to the United States at a very young age. Do these deportation threats pose a concern for people who do fall under DACA status?
Right. So currently not. So one of the protections under DACA is protection from removability. And then also, that authorization, to work and have a driver's license. So should DACA be eliminated, then they would also be vulnerable because they would not have any status, right? So they would be vulnerable as other undocumented individuals. And I think, one of the really difficult parts of the concern of losing DACA is that so many of these documented individuals are in every service industry, right? They're the teachers. They were on the front lines during the pandemic as responders. So to not have that opportunity to continue in their profession is also very difficult because many of them are now the primary financial support for their families. And when we talk about realizing the American dream, they definitely have been taking advantage of that and being able to exercise their their careers. And so take that away would have drastic economic and also emotional hardship on these families.
Something else that is really being talked about is Trump has promised to end birthright citizenship. For people who aren't familiar with that terminology, Kevin or Amagda, if you guys want to break down what that means, and also, does he have the power to do that once he's in office?
No, that's a very good question. The 14th Amendment of the Constitution states that people who are born in the United States on U.S. territory, whatever the immigration status of their parents, those people born here are U.S. citizens. It's a bright line rule. It's clear who's a citizen and who's not. And it was a rule that was added by the 14th Amendment to ensure that freed slaves were not denied citizenship. It was denied to avoid a racial caste system that people feared might follow the Civil War. And so it's been in place. It's been interpreted by the Supreme Court to give citizenship to people born here, even if their parents were undocumented. And it's one of the things I think we can be very proud about in our Constitution. Now, the Constitution says that you have citizenship if you're born here. No politician, no political leader, no president can say that you can just ignore the Constitution. And no reputable constitutional law scholar has said that the 14th Amendment's birthright citizenship provisions aren't enforceable. So you can't get rid of birthright citizenship by executive order. You can't get rid of birthright citizenship by a law passed by Congress. You can only get rid of birthright citizenship if you amend the Constitution. And that's a very complicated and lengthy process. And so I don't see how any president could eliminate birthright citizenship. But you're exactly right. President-elect Trump has said that he's going to eliminate it. And I think that we're very likely to see actions taken trying to limit or eliminate birthright citizenship. And I think they will be finally resolved by the courts and perhaps the U.S. Supreme Court.
Before we go, I do want to make sure our viewers at home who do have some questions or maybe are looking for resources, I want to spend some time talking about resources, because what is available here in our community for those people that do want information, they're looking for some help, where should they go?
Right. So there is a network in Sacramento. It's the Sacramento Fuel Network that is a collaboration of a number of organizations that are each providing information.
You said Sacramento Field Network?
Fuel. It's the Family Unity and Education
Fuel Network. Okay,
yes,
perfect. Just
you.
wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That will be providing your rights presentations. They will be providing consultations. They will be providing legal representation for individuals who require those services.
Yeah. Kevin, any other resources you'd like to mention that people should be aware of?
Well, I know that students in the University of California system have the assistance of the Immigrant Legal Services Center that is housed at UC Davis School of Law, but serves students on all the UC campuses. And it also provides services to parents of students who may need immigration assistance. And I think that the center currently is working hard to get the word out about what their rights are and aren't as we approach a new, very different immigration enforcement regime.
And I know we talk about, policies and what could happen. Is there anything you really want our viewers to know at home of what this current crisis looks like and the work that you guys are doing?
Right. So, thank you. And I think it's important to remember that every individual that is in the United States has constitutional rights, right? And it's very important to be knowledgeable about what those rights are, because they're counting on fear and people not exercising their rights. But it's important for people to seek legal counsel, to consult with immigration attorneys about what benefits they might be eligible for, that puts them on that pathway and eliminates some of that risk of being removed, and to go to reputable immigration attorneys or Department of Justice representatives. Don't go to the notarios, who might actually do more harm than good. And then also, I think, there is this commitment, at least in the Sacramento area, that law enforcement really wants people to report crimes and to not be afraid, right? And so there are avenues for which people who are victims of crime that might be able to get T visas or U visas, right? So become informed about what you're eligible for. and know that you're not alone.
Kevin, any final thoughts from you?
No, I think it's a very important point that our law enforcement agencies are very separate from federal immigration enforcement agencies. And California has a series of laws that are perhaps better than any state of the union, making sure that that separation is kept crystal clear so that immigrants feel safe in reporting crimes, feel safe in serving as witnesses in criminal prosecutions, and feel free to cooperate and work with police trying to fight crime in the communities. One of the problems, one of the concerns with getting state and local governments involved in immigration enforcement is that state and local government become too involved in immigration enforcement, not involved enough in fighting crime, and that immigrants who are part of our community won't feel comfortable going to local police. So I think it's important that people in California understand that there is this distinction. It's a rigorous sort of separation of state and federal government. And this is Professor Pérez's last point, and a very important one. There are many people who are there to assist and help the immigrant community as they work through this. Many people worked together in the first Trump administration to try to ensure that people's rights were protected. And there were many lawsuits that were brought that did protect people's rights. And during that time, the California legislature passed some very tough laws. In this legislature, in its special session, made it clear that we as a community, we as a state, are going to fight to protect the rights of people who live in our state. And so we are there as a state to help all members of the state.
Thank you both so much for your time. Thank you for being here. And of course, thank you at home for watching. If there's ever anything that you have a question about, reach out to us. We always have our experts to reach out to and answer any of your questions. Or if there's a topic that you would like us to go deeper into, just let us know. All you have to do is reach out to our team. As always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for inviting us into your homes, and I'll see you next time.